Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second installment of our partner webinar series, Digitising Nature Recovery. So I'm Tanya Nashi, Project Developer Assistant at EcoSulis, and it's my pleasure to host today's session. So we are thrilled to have with us Sophy Jones, a nature fintech developer from CreditNature. Sophy specializes in quantitative ecology and seamlessly integrates traditional ecological expertise with cutting-edge technology and innovations in nature finance. So she plays a pivotal role in the creation of nature impact tokens and the development of the CreditNature platform. So just to set up today's webinar will consist of a 40 to 45-minute presentation by Sophy, followed by a Q&A session. So please submit your questions through the Q&A chat function, and I will present them to Sophy on your behalf. So if time permits, we will also open the floor for live questions. And should you have any additional questions after the webinar, please feel free to reach out to us, and Liv in our chat will share our email address in the chat at the end of the session. So please note that this session is being recorded and will be sent to you via email afterwards. So we hope you find today's webinar informative and engaging. We look forward to your participation and questions. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Sophy. Sophy, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tanya. I'll just share my screen with you all. Here you go. Can someone give me a nod?
Yes, we can confirm we see that.
Awesome. Happy to get going. Cool. So yeah, thank you so much, Tanya, for the introduction. It's really nice to be here with you all virtually today, taking time out of your lunch. Really excited to kind of share some of the work we've been doing over the past few years at CreditNature to accelerate nature recovery and the investment into nature recovery using innovation and tech. So who are CreditNature? So we are a nature fintech startup founded in 2022 by two rewilding experts, Kane Blythe and Paul Jepson. CreditNature was spun out of EcoSulis, which is Kane's other company, which gives us a really amazing kind of expertise base, I guess. They have a 30-year track record of providing nature-based solutions. And our mission at CreditNature is to mobilize investment into nature recovery, provide corporates and investors with a way to secure sustainable business growth in this kind of uncertain world we live in with the biodiversity and climate crisis, also be able to evidence their nature positive activity. For the past year at CreditNature, we've been working with the Scottish Government under a pre-commercial agreement under a kind of CivTech challenge, and the challenge was to develop biodiversity credits that bring simplicity for buyers and suppliers and enables investment in Scottish nature. And now we're kind of a really exciting stage where we're nearing our MVP technological infrastructure, which actually supports the creation and kind of use and consumption of these nature credits. So just like a brief overview of what I'm going to cover today. I think it's going to be a little bit of a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully we can get around it all, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions, so I'll try and leave room for those. But we're going to be looking at, what is the solution we've been building and what challenge are we trying to address here and what opportunity has that kind of been born out of. We'll also be looking at exactly what that solution is and the kind of technology that we're harnessing and I guess what benefits we see from that technology and how we think it can help transform this kind of emerging sector of nature fintech. And then lastly, if we have any time, I'll kind of pose some hurdles or maybe kind of more interesting thought points which are emerging as we kind of continue to innovate in this space. So firstly, what is the challenge that we're trying to address? Recently, there seems to have been this shift in kind of worldwide understanding of the importance of biodiversity in nature and the extent of the loss and threat to that, I think. And there's a new drive to not only focus more on biodiversity and ecosystems, but to actually restore these as well as kind of protect these ecosystems. This is really significant. There's it's now been acknowledged that the biodiversity and climate crises are definitely linked, and that's kind of well known, and that we need holistic solutions to these. And this kind of moves us away from the kind of older thinking that was focused more just on carbon, which sometimes led to kind of detrimental effects on nature. This new kind of focus on nature restoration has been highlighted in the Global Biodiversity Framework's international 30 by 30 target, a really exciting one being to recover 30% of degraded terrestrial ecosystems by 2030. Obviously, that is a huge goal, and at the moment, we need some kind of funding to get there. And there's this funding gap which has been identified that's kind of preventing us from addressing the biodiversity and climate crisis and kind of reach those goals. Again, that's kind of highlighted in the Global Biodiversity Framework, in their goal where they highlight the need to scale investment into nature if we're going to solve this crisis, with the target to mobilise at least $200 billion per year into nature by 2030, which is huge. Because of this kind of, growing acknowledgement and awareness of the significant challenge we have, there's kind of mounting ESG pressure on corporates, asset managers and investors, and others, as well as kind of new regulations coming out, such as the EU CSRD guidelines, the ESCSRD and guidelines, such as NFD, kind of telling or instructing corporates on how they might disclose and report their impacts on nature and climate. This presents a really amazing opportunity that we kind of need to harness, because these corporates and investors are beginning to understand their need to create resilience with their own business because of risks from climate and nature, but also that they have a kind of responsibility to have a positive impact, which can be fulfilled by investing in nature recovery. So this is really exciting because it's created a space for innovation, create a solution where nature is fit for finance, but where also finance is fit for nature. And I think crucially here, we need to ensure that whatever solution we create to drive finance into nature, it has a truly positive effect and sustainable impact on nature and the rural economy. So balancing those needs of finance, but also definitely the needs of nature. So at the top level, what we're looking for is a solution that mobilizes investment into nature recovery at scale. We recognize that nature markets are a potential solution to this at CreditNature, and it has the potential to address the needs of both the corporates and investors and nature and climate. So similar to carbon, assets representing units of ecosystem change could be bought and sold within a nature market. Just as a ton of carbon can be sequestered, measured, and sold and reported on as a credit, so can that unit of ecosystem change. And this would have a really positive effect for nature, as it would create a mechanism to channel funds into nature recovery, but then it would also provide corporates and investors with a product to invest in to act upon their nature and climate strategies. There definitely are many kind of design challenges with this when we're looking at nature markets. A few that are really important, I've just kind of listed here as a few questions. The first one being, it's really imperative that the units of change, of that ecosystem change, that underpin, nature credits, are scientifically rigorous, so that we can be assured that the impact we're saying has happened is real and nature is definitely being positively impacted, but to also reassure investors and people making claims that what they're claiming is accurate. And it's also really important that investments and nature recovery projects are structured in a type of way to basically stimulate the creation of sustainable nature-based enterprises. So landholders need to basically have a business plan alternative to typical agriculture, which is, sustainable and is going to create new jobs and potentially new sectors in the rural economy, to be able to keep to make it, I guess, sensible to move away from a typical agriculture model to a more rewilding nature recovery model on the land. Lastly, as we go forward developing these new markets, it's important that we can learn from and build on the good work of existing codes and crediting systems, and then work on ways to increase efficiencies and accuracy. And to do this, we need to use innovative thinking, forward-thinking policy, and the application of tech. I'm now going to spend a bit of time introducing you to our tech solution at CreditNature, which I'll overarchingly kind of refer to as the CreditNature platform. And this brings together the two technological zones, which is the zone of quantification and the zone of accounting. The zone of quantification takes the messiness and complexity of nature and converts it into meaningful units of change through calculation of a metric. The metrics must measure indicators of key ecosystem characteristics, and this kind of takes inspiration from the structure of the Human Development Index, and is in alignment with the UN system of environmental and economic accounting. And this is really important because we want to make sure that whatever kind of numbers and metrics that underpin these credits or any KPIs can be reported on and accounted for according to global accounting standards. As the market kind of develops, there's definitely going to be multiple ways and methodologies for measuring ecosystems and biodiversity to underpin credits that kind of pops up. I think through this, it's going to become really increasingly important, kind of understand the differences between these so we can put in place market standards and also to enable comparison and empower, I guess, buyers to understand what they're claiming when they buy these credits. And for us, I guess some of the key attributes for comparison that we've been thinking about are whether the method uses a percentage increase or a point increase. So when I say this, it's whether we look at a 10% increase from a baseline, or whether we think of on a point scale going from 5 to 10 being a 5-point increase. These are two kind of methodologies for calculating that change in ecosystems through the metrics, but that can lead to real disparities in the number of credits produced from the same probably ecological gain on the site. So it's really important to understand that difference from a buyer's point of view, but also within the markets when we want to be able to compare these credits. It's also really important, again, to understand what a unit actually represents and whether that's a change in ecosystem services that are outputted by a system, or whether that's a change in the underlying ecosystem integrity that then gives rise to those ecosystem services. Again, that's a point to make sure that a buyer is really clear on, so they know exactly what they're claiming. Lastly, it's really important that these metrics and credits are underpinned by real scientific rigor. Measuring biodiversity and ecosystems and nature is really complex. There's lots of data and lots of ways to go about it. So it's really important to assure that scientific rigor through something like a third-party accreditation, because that just illustrates straight away that metric is reflecting what it's saying it's reflecting. That makes sense. At CreditNature, we've developed an ecosystem condition index, which measures point changes in ecosystem condition, focusing on 4 key ecosystem characteristics, which I'll dive into a bit later, on a scale of 0 to 100. It's been recently third-party accredited by Accounting for Nature, which has been amazing. It's been a rigorous kind of year-long journey, but has been great to validate our approach and to, I guess, evidence that our metrics brought together as an index represent what we're saying it represents, which is a change in ecosystem condition. And what's really exciting, I think, is how we're implementing it, which is through using kind of different technologies to try and create new efficiencies and accuracies in that system, which again, I'll kind of expand on a little bit more later. And then moving on to our second zone, which is the zone of accounting. This takes those units and translates those into assets, such as nature credits, which can be accounted for on balance sheets and reported on. So this is where, you know, the utility of all of that measurement and calculation comes in. But what's really important is that we're able to provide really high levels of assurance that these assets are high integrity and the claim that is coming out of them is true, basically, and that we're able to prove it is true. Because both the creators of that and the owners and people reporting those claims are going to be accountable for that quality at the end of the day. So at CreditNature, we're looking at how we can leverage tech to do that by kind of making the life cycle of these assets from, you know, project development and monitoring through to the creation and how they're used. So whether they're sold, who owns them, and how they're reported, make sure that's all very transparent. And also through digital ledger technology, making that immutable. So those records are there for anyone to see. And through this, I believe we can start going towards that really high level of assurance that's needed to make sure we can substantiate a claim. And at CreditNature, we've developed two types of digital nature asset which speak to these needs. And again, I'll speak to that slightly later on. So these fundamental zones that I just introduced are combined within the CreditNature platform. It basically provides a one-stop shop for the development of nature recovery projects and the creation of these assets through to the management of the assets. So how they're sold, how they're reported, and the important aspects of kind of data sharing. And at CreditNature, I see what we've built as a really new, innovative technology infrastructure, which can underpin kind of cost and time efficient and trustworthy nature markets that address the needs of both nature and finance. So now we're going to dive a bit deeper into those two zones I've introduced, beginning with that zone of quantification, which for us is kind of embodied in CreditNature's NARIA framework. So the NARIA framework, which stands for Natural Asset Recovery Investment Analytics Framework, comprises of two tools. So those are the Terrestrial Ecosystem Condition Index and the Ecosystem Management Rating. The Ecosystem Condition Index converts the complexity of nature into a single number on a scale of 0 to 100. And basically a change, so an uplift in that scale, indicates a change in ecosystem integrity or uplifted ecosystem integrity arisen from restorative land management practices. The four key characteristics that are measured within this index are organism dispersal, natural disturbance, food web complexity, and niche utilization. We can see that those are indicated by these four variables. So whether there's a barrier to species movement, the land class model of that particular area, the presence and distribution of megafauna, and the presence and absence of bird species within an area. What I find really interesting is at this kind of variable indicator level, there's no attachment of kind of good or bad to the data or, you know, kind of healthy ecosystem, lower the ecosystem. It's when we convert that data through our algorithms into the metrics and the metric outputs that we can then attach meaning and attach a score to that data, which is pretty cool. So each metric is scored on 0 to 100, with 0 being the lowest integrity and 100 being the highest integrity. What I thought might be useful is to take you through one of these metrics. So I thought I'd talk about the bird trait diversity metric in a bit more detail. So the bird trait diversity metric here is associated with the niche utilization characteristic. Niches within an ecosystem, for those who are less familiar, are basically different parts of the ecosystem that that species can take advantage on. So it might be a specific food resource, it might be a nesting resource, for example, but it's basically different parts of the ecosystem that are provided that enable that ecosystem to host different species, is how I think of it. And a really great indicator of the variety of niches within a site is bird species. Because birds have evolved over millions of years, they're very diverse in their characteristics, because they've evolved to take advantage of a real range of different niches, which means that on a site, they should be great indicators of what niches are there and what ones they're taking advantage of. And because birds can fly, they're mobile, it means they're more, they're going to be quicker in some cases to recolonize an area after it's had some interventions, some land management interventions. And so it makes them a good indicator of how niche availability and diversity is changing over time. So what we do is gather a bird species list from a range of sources. This can be, the classic surveys, so breeding bird surveys, wintering surveys. It can also be from local ecological knowledge, like local experienced birders, landowner records, kind of citizen science records like eBird. We can take in all of these different records, pull them together, kind of understand the quality of that data and the reliability of it first, and then we basically can pull out the morphological and life history traits associated with the birds within the list for that particular site, and we can use that to understand the diversity of characteristics of the birds within that system, and use that to indicate the kind of niche utilization within that space. And what we expect is that as a site recovers, there'll be higher diversity and abundance of niches. So say over time, a wetland appears on a site through nature recovery, that'll increase the diversity of niches within that site, which means it can host not only just a more abundance of birds, but also a wider variety of bird species. And so that would be reflected in an uplift in the bird trait diversity metric. That's just an example of one, but the other three go through similar kind of steps in terms of bringing in the data, understanding its quality, and pulling out the kind of necessary insights in order to inform that final score coming out. And those 4 metrics are then combined to give us an overall ecosystem condition index score out of 100. Due to the nature of these metrics being really tied to land management in terms of how they change, we can use that to predict how our metrics will change when we're looking at different land management plans. This is really true of 2 of our metrics. So 2 of our metrics are lead metrics, the ecological connectivity and the trophic function, which means that they instantly change with land management practices. So for example, with ecological connectivity, if you remove a barrier from a site, straight away your score is going to go up. The other 2 metrics are more lag metrics, so vegetation spatial diversity and bird trait diversity. they will be still impacted by that land management change, but it will be seen maybe a few years later. So, for example, with bird trait diversity, say you put in a wetland, you won't see, or birds will start to recolonize, but it won't be an instant thing. It'll take time. And then you'll see that change in the metric. But whether it's the lead or lag, that close relationship between the land management actions and the metrics means we can begin to forecast how that ecosystem condition index is actually going to change. And we can kind of model different land management scenarios. So it can be a great tool to aid decision making when it comes to figuring out what the plan is with a project, and to kind of set out maybe different ambition levels for that nature recovery. Second tool is our ecosystem management rating on the bottom. So this is a tool to rate the impact of land management on ecosystem condition. So it takes those characteristics from the ecosystem condition index and looks at how different land management practices grouped into assets will impact the different ecosystem characteristics. And this is scored on a scale of A to G, with A to C indicating a kind of upgrading effect on ecosystem conditions. You can see the kind of green boxes. B being a neutral impact on ecosystem conditions, so the yellow boxes, and E to G kind of indicating a downgrading effect, so that would be the more red boxes here. And this is basically structured with ontologies of land management practices and then broader asset classes to group them. And as we collect more data on, I guess, the interaction between land management practices and the ecosystem condition index, how that's changing with these land management practices, we'll be able to make these ratings lots more specific and accurate. And again, will be a great tool to help with decision making. The ecosystem condition index and ecosystem management rating are implemented in the CreditNature platform using what we call the NARIA calculator, which is where we take, the complexity of that metrics design, like the one I just described with bird trait diversity, and we code the algorithms into versioned calculations, basically, which can then be run in the cloud. And to assure that, the metric outputs are correct and that the code is accurately representing our accredited method, there'll be a third-party code audit at some point, and that just brings in that extra assurance layer there into the tech. We're also developing data capture apps to enable really efficient input of data. And this, from experience, is where it can take a lot of time to pull in all the different data feeds and to track where data is coming from and make sure that's all a really clear, trail of data. And so within the platform, we want to build these data capture apps that make it really simple and easy to, number one, input data, but also be able to discuss that data, have feedback, make changes, and work with landowners and project developers in a really frictionless way. We also want to configure these in a way that means when the data comes in, it's coming in straight away in a really nice structured way, to be used straight in metric calculations, and also to perform some small preliminary data checks, which means that as data inputters are inputting data, you'd get warnings and that would be flagged in real time. So, instead of sending the data off and someone reviewing it and then it coming back and it being a bit of a lengthy process to track, there are some things that we can just flag straight away. We can't do that with everything through the tech, but there are little bits that we will be able to flag. And I guess kind of leading on from this, a really key aspect of what we're doing here that increase the time and the cost efficiencies is to take some of that burden, I guess, off of third-party verifiers through automation, but still keeping those humans in the loop, I guess. So some of those data checks of incoming metric data can be automated within that Nairo calculator and the data capture apps, as I just kind of described, and can produce warnings and errors in real time that can allow us to go in there and understand what needs to be checked and delved into more and decisions made about. That automation and kind of structuring of the data can also relieve some of the potential of human error built into the system. So, for example, say you're inputting a bird species and it's not typically found within your project area. There are ways in which we can kind of flag that someone might need to look at that and verify that that's accurate, or it might need more evidence, for example. So through the use of tech that I've kind of just described above, I think we're able to assure a kind of high level of scientific rigor and accurate execution of that scientific rigor and good, accurate representation of the metrics through the code, which is really vital for high integrity nature markets to build trust and to make them as impactful as possible. And so, yeah, through this, our metrics should be used to really effectively underpin these investment products such as nature credit. So our second technological zone is the zone of accounting, and this is addressed by CreditNature's digital nature assets. So digital nature assets might be a term that's pretty unfamiliar for a lot of people here, but it simply means a digital representation of an environmental project and its benefits. And these assets are created to enable investment into nature recovery and to evidence nature positive claims. So at CreditNature, we've been developing two kinds of digital nature asset, which are a nature investment certificate and a nature credit. So a nature investment certificate being a 1 hectare stake in a nature recovery project. And it's created to basically enable investment directly into a specific high integrity nature recovery project, with the idea being that throughout that project, nature credits will be generated, which can go back to the investor in that project. And then nature credits are, as I say, generated across that project after kind of monitoring periods, and represent a verified 1 point uplift in ecosystem condition over 1 hectare. So if we take an example, say we have a project in Scotland, it's a 1,000 hectare farm, we'd come up with the project plan, we'd specify what benefits are going to come out of that. We collect data on the site itself and do the baselines. And all of that would go into a nature investment certificate or be associated with a nature investment certificate. And 1,000 of those would be created according to, and that matches up with the 1,000 hectares. It doesn't mean that each nature investment certificate is associated with a particular hectare. It's just a nice way to I guess partition how many nature investment certificates you create per project. And then corporates or investors can come along and they can buy as many of these nature investment certificates as necessary, and that gives them that stake in the nature recovery project, and means that down the line they will be able to accrue the nature credits, which they're able to report as impact, as positive nature impact. So CreditNature, these assets are tokens, which is a type of crypto utility asset. And each one of those is associated with different data, as we kind of showed before, that project data, the monitoring data, the plans, etc. And these tokens are found on a distributed ledger. So a distributed ledger is, like, in its simplest terms, a decentralized database, which means no one entity has control over that. And the data and transactions that are held on the distributed ledger are tamper-proof, so they can't be changed. And the data that's held is also transparent, so everyone can see it. Tokens themselves they can be non-fungible or fungible, which means they can be unique. That's what non-fungible means, or they can be identical, which is fungible, or they can be somewhere in the middle, which I think sometimes is a lot where we're working towards. They can also be assigned different behaviors through something called a smart contract, which basically you use to assign how they act within a system. And these properties, these kind of programmability properties of the tokens, as well as the kind of immutable data holding and the transparency of the distributed ledger, makes these two technologies really ideal for implementing our digital nature assets. One of the main reasons being that it's really important in the market that nature positive claims can be evidenced really easily and clearly to kind of prevent any worries towards greenwashing. And by kind of committing data that shows the steps to that asset creation, so that could be, project development, monitoring, data verification, the completion of land management commitments, having that all really clearly laid out in a consistent format into, we call it a trust chain, but I guess it's kind of like a Web3 audit trail, is really powerful because it means that evidence to substantiate your claim is really clearly there to see and kind of takes that worry off, I think. Also, by configuring those smart contracts that govern how the tokens can behave, we can use that to enforce market standards, to govern things like trading and retirement and reporting. A big plus of this being we can help prevent double counting of assets, which has been an issue in the past. So in order to report impact from a credit, it has to be retired on chain first. And this basically means that asset on the distributed ledger can no longer be traded or moved. It's just kept with one owner on the distributed ledger. But you can see lose that utility of the trading, but you're still able to see all of that kind of Web3 audit trail to do with that claim. It also brings new efficiencies when thinking about implementing governance around trading and who can buy these assets. So things like implementing blacklists maybe for landholders that have specific requirements from buyers and things like that. So I think there's lots of creative and exciting things we can do using this technology, and this is really only just the start, but has the potential to create, I think, an amazing, really trustworthy and efficient ecosystem here. So I think through the use of distributed ledger technology and the way that we're leveraging it, we're able to offer nature credits where the claims underneath it are really well substantiated, and we can help avoid those claims of greenwash and prevent issues around double counting. That will hopefully bring a lot more trust into this really young market, and help kickstart it in a way in which I think all participants can feel really confident. So quickly, a kind of final key attribute of our platform that's really important, I think, so not one to skip, is how our data is shared, or the market data is shared, because it's a really important component of these emerging markets that we need to get right. So as I kind of previously mentioned, the use of distributed ledger technology can help bring transparency to the system. And we can kind of regulate this in a way by defining a minimum set of data points associated with those assets on the ledger that can be transparent for all levels, including the public. There is a way to associate data with these assets that can then only be accessed by some people, but I think that's where we need to understand what data everyone needs and wants to see and has a right to see. But to ensure this data is accessible, because even though, yes, distributed ledger technology does bring transparency by having it there for everyone to see, it doesn't mean it's the easiest to find. So within our platform, we're developing dashboards which will really openly and easily show this data, which we can tailor for a variety of audiences. So not all audiences are going to need to see all data or might not be able to see all data. And so we want to, really tailor these to the different stakeholders within the market. Also be able to convert that complex ecological data and market data into really approachable data visualizations to make sure that this is digestible for everyone in the system. I think the more everyone understands, the better and the more transparent we can be, the better the system will operate. So yeah, through these dashboards, multiple market participants will be able to kind of track and audit and just explore nature recovery projects and the claims really efficiently and simply, and can crucially increase the transparency of our system. So, of course, some of this functionality that I've described above of our platform could be done without the use of technologies like cloud computing and distributed ledger technology. However, I hope that I've kind of shown that the use of the technology and I guess turning some of nature recovery digital is a good thing and can lead to amazing new efficiencies and trust in this kind of new emerging market that is going to be beneficial for finance and, really importantly, nature. So I think that is, I have a few bits there, but I think that's all from me mainly at the moment. It would be good to get a few questions and reactions, but thank you everyone for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sophie. Also, firstly, congratulations on your third-party accreditation.
Thank you. Thank you.
So it's truly fascinating to see. Yeah, it's been truly fascinating to see how the technology is being leveraged to support nature recovery and the integration of ecological expertise with the advanced technology, and how it's opening up so many possibilities for nature recovery efforts. But it by no means sounds like an easy task to convert the messiness of nature to meaningful units. Yeah, so it was
definitely been a process.
Yeah, it was particularly cool, as you said, that there is no attachment of good or bad, but it's with the metric output you generate a score that indicates the effect, which really highlights the innovative approaches being taken in the field. So, as you can imagine, I have many, many questions for you. Thank you for sending them all in. Okay, so also thank you, Paul, for jumping in and answering some of these questions on the chat.
Thanks.
So one of our first questions is from Kieran Raymer, and they said they might have missed it at the beginning, but how do you equate units of nature to each other? So carbon's easy, but biodiversity isn't really comparable even with the same ecosystem. So how would you equate those units of nature?
So is that kind of measuring, is that through different measurement systems, I guess?
Yes, I believe so.
So I think it goes back to figuring out those key differences, those attributes between different methodologies that will be different, and find ways to compare them. I don't think that because some methodologies will measure certain bits like the outcomes, like the ecosystem services, whereas kind of our methodology is measuring the underlying integrity of the system. I think that there's it's not a direct comparison. But I think the more we can take a selection of these methods and apply them across a wide variety of sites, basically the more we use them, we can understand how they all work, and hopefully find ways to compare them, because it's definitely going to be needed in the future.
Brilliant. And then just to go on from that, Kieran also asks, by combining the ecosystem integrity into a single figure, is there a risk of losing more granular insights?
Yeah, so I think, of course, you take the 4 metrics and then you bring those together into that single figure. And at that point, there will be some things that get lost. The more you make things simpler, I guess, the more you lose things. But that's where what we're trying to do on the kind of data sharing side is bring some of that raw data back in at that point to show those nuances that you might miss from that single figure. So, we need that single figure for markets, basically, and to underpin those credits. But we want to make sure that, you can dig down to what bird species are there. You can dig down to what large herbivores are having what effect on the land, and all of the land management practices that go along with that. So I think, yes, but by keeping hold of and grounding the score within that kind of wealth of knowledge around it, I think that hopefully combats that.
Brilliant. And then we have one from Genevieve. So, do you measure integrity against a historic baseline for a given ecosystem, or how is it this is determined?
Yeah, so we don't measure against a historic baseline. What we're looking to is a future state, because I think you're never going to go backwards, and I don't think you know exactly what that looked like. But we know what we're trying to achieve going forward, and that's nature recovery in whatever form that takes. So by applying the nature recovery techniques and the land management to a project, there will be an outcome, but it's just not a prescribed one, I guess. It's being able to say, okay, these 4 characteristics and processes are really important for ecosystem integrity. And as ecosystem integrity improves, those 4 should improve. But it's not comparing it to a historic baseline. If that makes sense.
Yes, yeah. As very much with the world of rewilding,
Yeah.
you're not using that baseline to limit how far you can go with the work that you're doing. Yeah, that's
exactly. Yeah, exactly
brilliant.
that.
So we've got another one from Max Haddock. So does the ecosystem integrity assessment make any considerations of the biodiversity that is present within the soils, or does the assessment consider only above ground species?
So at the moment, it doesn't measure the biodiversity within the soils. I'd suggest that high integrity measuring the integrity of an ecosystem would probably give some nods to what the biodiversity of that soil looks like. But no, it doesn't focus on that yet. Obviously, eDNA is quite, and the eDNA of soils has been quite a big topic for a while, and a really cool one. So I think it's definitely another technology to watch in terms of what we can learn from that and what insights we can get from that, and how we can take that raw data of biodiversity of soils and turn that into what does that mean in terms of how that ecosystem is actually functioning.
I'd just like to say, guys, there's been a lot of questions, so apologies if I'm not able to get through them all today, but we'll try and follow up on any questions we missed after the webinar. Okay, so to continue with the questions, we have one from Dr. Heather Gilbert. So how viable is this likely to be for smaller sites? So, for example, 30 to 50 hectares.
Yeah, so I'd have to check on exactly what our minimum viable is. But I think it is made, is it over 100 hectares? I'm definitely going to have to check. It might be over 100. That's the minimum. But I think, at smaller sites, there are a lot of different management practices that might not be as viable. And so the changes that you see through the Ecosystem Integrity Index aren't going to be as applicable at that level. So yeah, I think, but that's one of the things that's interesting at the moment with the index is we're applying it at kind of all different kind of scales to see how it does react over a really broad load of scales, I guess.
Yeah, wonderful. We've got one from Sandra Moran. This one got a lot of likes. So is there a risk of confusion and inertia with the growing number of ecosystem service credit platforms being developed? So like, do you think a lot of the aims and methods seem to be broadly similar, she says? So how would you say it sets it apart?
Yeah, I think there definitely will be confusion going forward. There's a lot of different methodologies or platforms popping up. And I think again that comes back to I think comparing the different attributes of that platform. I think there's different ones because there's the methodologies and comparing the attributes of those, and then there's any platforms that are I guess dealing with the creation of credits and things like that. And there will be kind of different aspects of those that set them apart. But I think it will be quite confusing at the start to get there. And I'd suggest maybe looking at what tech they're using to do it, how long they typically take to do things, and kind of example projects, things like that. I think a lot are quite specialized at the moment to different geographies, things like that. But also going to things like, I think it's the TNFD have a tool catalog. And I think they're going to really start trying to drill into what these different tools are and how they can be used by different market participants.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Sophie, for clarifying. So we've got another question from Nicola Wilson. So to what degree are you using the tech like satellite imagery or eDNA as a data source for the metrics?
Yeah, sure. So satellite imagery, we bring into our vegetation spatial diversity and connectivity metrics. Those ones are more, I guess, map based. So they bring in more of the satellite imagery, as well as things like drones when needed. eDNA, we don't currently use, but as I kind of said before, it's something that these kind of technologies we always keep an eye on. One that we're working through how it might apply at the moment is acoustic data for birds, and that's a really exciting one where there seems to be quite a lot of movement at the moment. There's there's the free models for assessing that bird data and taking that acoustic data and seeing what birds come out of it, but more and more there's companies popping up that are looking to refine those models. And to also build in verification and the analysis of that data into the actual sensors, which is amazing because it means the data that you send is tiny compared to what you would send. So yeah, new technologies like that are really exciting, and one that's really applicable to our bird trait diversity metric. But it's definitely a work in progress to understand how accurate those are, and what those confidence levels and trust are, I guess.
We also have one from Nielsen. So do you continuously measure the status of the sites to update the value of the credits during the progression?
Yeah, so say it's a 10-year project, we'd do our baseline, and then we'd measure either every year or every 2 years, and after kind of 2 consecutive years where we can kind of verify an uplift, and we can then release some credits underpinned by that uplift. So yeah, it's continuous verification through or monitoring throughout, but it's not like sensors where you're getting in data every minute, and that's updating it. I think that is like the dream. Is you get to a point where you've just got all your sensors out and you can understand everything that's going on all at once and continuously update. But that's definitely not there yet. So it's probably yearly updates in terms of monitoring. But that data can come in at different times, obviously.
Yeah, with the progression. Okay, we've got time for one more question. So, do you think this methodology has the potential to meet the needs of the financial markets for liquidity? Say, if biodiversity credits were to become an asset that could be purchased as part of a portfolio in retail and pension funds.
Yeah, so and I mean, in terms of liquidity, I guess it's just the amount of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I think as long as we can create a system that can scale, hopefully we can provide the liquidity within that. And the idea is that although the nature investment certificates are quite specific and more non-fungible, if we're talking in those terms, the units that come out of that can definitely be more fungible. They'd still be attached to certain projects in a certain year, but they still represent a unit of ecosystem change over a hectare. So those are more fungible. And at that point, I think you can bring a whole bunch into a portfolio and show those differences, but also, yeah, have that liquidity in there.
Okay, that's brilliant. I think we have time for one more question, Sophie.
Nice.
So I'm going to throw one in there for
Yeah,
you.
go for it.
So do you think, so again, this is by Nelson, do you think you will take on different niches in the market?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's those niches are still being defined, like as we speak, and I think we don't know exactly what they're going to be yet. We did some work recently trying to map out what all of those niches are, I guess, and how they all interact, especially when we start bringing in new digital technology, because I think that can lead to bridges in those niches, which can be really difficult because, you know, we still need walls in places to safeguard what we're doing. But yeah, there'll be niches for everyone, and I think multiple players in all of those niches. So it's going to be exciting to see how that kind of evolves.
Okay, yeah, it's going to definitely be a space to watch.
Yeah, absolutely.
So brilliant. So unfortunately, guys, I'm going to need to wrap up our questions for today as we are coming to the end of our time. But thank you again, Sophie, for your presentation today and for supporting us with our partner webinar series. And thank you all for joining. And just to remind you that we'll be sending out the recordings to you all, and any questions we were unable to answer, we'll make sure to get those to you. And hopefully we'll see some of you at our next webinar in June with Harry Wright for Bright Tide. So just again, thank you, Sophie, so much for joining and presenting for us.
Thanks so much for having me.
And
for everyone
so,
for joining.
yeah. So have a nice rest of the afternoon, everyone. And thank you and goodbye for now.